Hello, and welcome back to the To Be Like Christ Bible Study Podcast, where we explore and explain one chapter of the Bible at a time. My name is Luke, and I am thy host. And today's chapter is Genesis 46. Let's read the text together. I'm going to be reading from the English Standard Version of the Bible. And while I find it in my Bible, if you have a moment, hit the subscribe button on your podcast player so we can study together again sometime. Genesis 46 has 34 verses. Let's read. So Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I myself will go with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. Then Jacob set out from Beersheba. The sons of Israel carried Jacob their father, their little ones, and their wives in the wagons that Pharaoh had sent to carry him. They also took their livestock and their goods, which they had gained in the land of Canaan, and came into Egypt, Jacob and all his offspring with him, his sons and his sons' sons with him, his daughters and his sons' daughters. All his offspring he brought with him into Egypt. Now these are the names of the descendants of Israel who came into Egypt: Jacob and his sons, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, and the sons of Reuben, Hanok, Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. The sons of Simeon, Jemuel, Jamin, Ohad, Jachin, Zohar, and Shaul, the son of a Canaanite woman. The sons of Levi, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. The sons of Judah, Onan, Shelah, Perez, and Zerah. But and Onan died in the land of Canaan. And the sons of Perez were Hezron and Hamul. The sons of Issachar, Tola, Puvah, Yob, and Shimron. The sons of Zebulun, Sered, Elon, and Jaleel. These are the sons of Leah, whom she bore to Jacob in Padan Aram, together with his daughter Dinah. Altogether his sons and his daughters numbered 33. The sons of Gad, Ziphion, Haggai, Shuni, Esbon, Eri, Arodi, and Areli. The sons of Asher, Imnah, Ishva, Ishvi, Beriah, with Sarah their sister, and the sons of Beriah, Heber, and Malkiel. These are the sons of Zilpah, whom Laban gave to Leah his daughter, and these she bore to Jacob 16 persons. The sons of Rachel, Jacob's wife, Joseph, and Benjamin. And to Joseph in the land of Egypt were born Manasseh and Ephraim, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, the priest of On, bore to him. And the sons of Benjamin, Bela, Becher, Ashbel, Gera, Naaman, Ehi, Rosh, Muppim, Huppim, and Ard. These are the sons of Rachel, whom were born to Jacob 14 persons in all. The son of Dan, Hushim. The sons of Naphtali, Jaziel, Guni, Jezer, and Shelem. These are the sons of Bilhah, whom Laban gave to Rachel his daughter, and these she bore to Jacob 7 persons in all. All the persons belonging to Jacob who came into Egypt, who were his descendants, not including Jacob's sons' wives, were 66 persons in all. And the sons of Joseph, who were born to him in Egypt, were 2. All the persons of the house of Jacob who came into Egypt were 70. He had sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to show the way before him in Goshen, and they came into the land of Goshen. And then Joseph prepared his chariot and went up to meet Israel his father in Goshen. He presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. Israel said to Joseph, Now let me die, since I have seen your face, and know that you are still alive. Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, I will go up and tell Pharaoh, and will say to him, My brothers and my father's household, whom were in the land of Canaan, have come to me. And the men are shepherds, for they have been keepers of livestock. And they have brought their flocks and their herds and all that they have. When Pharaoh calls you and says, What is your occupation? You shall say, Your servants have been keepers of livestock from our youth even until now, both we and our fathers, in order that you may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. There you have it. That is the text of Genesis chapter 46. Let's remind ourselves of our context a little bit here. We won't go back too far in the story of Joseph, but really just to the last couple chapters. You remember that Joseph has now revealed himself to his brothers. He said, I am your brother Joseph, who you sold into slavery 20 plus years ago, and I am now ruling over Egypt at God's help because God has blessed me and he's directed my steps. And that's been a great thing because I've been able to save a lot of lives. Now, that's great, but not so great for Joseph's brothers. At least they think it might not be so great for them. Oh no, Joseph is still alive. He's standing in front of us. He's more powerful than us. He rules over this entire nation of Egypt that everyone is dependent on. We did him wrong all these years ago. What's going to happen to us? Is he now going to take his revenge on us now that he's finally revealed his identity? Is he going to get us back for what we did to him all those years ago? And of course, as we talked about in the last couple of chapters, Joseph says, no, I'm not seeking revenge. I can look back over my life. I can look at the events that happened to me, the things that you did to me, even that were wrong. And I can see how God has used all of those things to save Egypt, to save the nations around Egypt from this terrible famine. And it has all been God's work. So I'm not angry. I'm not here to take revenge. I'm not holding a grudge against you. I welcome you as my brothers. I've forgiven you. And now, please bring my father and your entire households down to Egypt so that you can live here with me, because obviously I have some say in what goes on and I can provide for you. So bring Israel, Jacob, my father, down here with all your households, and you can live out the famine down here in Egypt, and you can live in the land of Goshen. So after this providential reconnection of the brothers return home to their father, and they tell him, Joseph is still alive. He wasn't eaten by a wild animal, and now he is essentially the ruler of Egypt. He's second only to Pharaoh himself. Originally, Jacob or Israel, he doesn't believe them. He thinks that they're lying or crazy, or it'd be hard to believe. But then they start telling their father about their experience, and then the wagons that Pharaoh has sent and the gifts that Pharaoh has sent back to Canaan, they start showing up, and all of a sudden Jacob's like, wow, this is actually true. My son Joseph, who I loved so much, is still alive. I've thought he's been dead all of these years. And so Jacob agrees that he's going to take his entire household down to the land of Egypt. And we're going to see him making that journey in chapter 46. And remember, we talked about how the land of Canaan, that's supposed to be the promised land. That's supposed to be the land that Jacob's descendants are going to inherit when they become a great nation. It's going to be their homeland. So we see Jacob leaving here now. Does he have God's blessing in that, or is this a mistake? That question will be answered very quickly in chapter 46. We find out, yes, he indeed does have God's blessing in doing this. God tells him to go down to Egypt, and he says that in Egypt, he's going to fulfill the part of the promise that he gave to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that he's going to make their descendants into a great nation. So that's kind of where we're picking up in chapter 46. They're just about to set out from Canaan with their household, loaded up on these wagons with their flocks and their herds, and they're moving on down south to the land of the pyramids. So now we can start digging into our PDF outline. And by the way, as we are about to cover our Bible timeline or historical section, our historical timeline, I do not know if the pyramids had been built at this point. In case somebody was like, wait a second, those aren't up yet. They haven't constructed those yet. I do not know the exact date and timing of the construction of the pyramids. So, Egypt's known for pyramids. That's the only reason I said it. Okay. Our PDF is free. It contains all the key information of the chapter. And we have one of these for all 50 chapters of Genesis. You can download it at tobelikechrist.com for your reference for free. Print it off, save it. If you'd like to get all these outlines in a book, you can get one on Amazon.com. So our first section is always when. When did these events happen? Joseph was 30 years old when he became the ruler of Egypt. That would be approximately 1715 BC. Jacob's family moved to Egypt roughly the second year of the 7-year famine. So this would be approximately 1706 BC. Now we are going to talk about our main characters, the main people who are central to this chapter, and we pretty much know them all. So let's go through this section relatively quickly. We have Joseph, who's Jacob's son with Rachel. We have Joseph's brothers. He's got 11 of them, and we're even going to talk about their children and some of their wives in this chapter. We are going to talk about Pharaoh, who is the king of Egypt. Pharaoh is not a name, but it's a title. So that's Joseph's boss, the only guy in Egypt who has more authority than Joseph himself. And then we have Jacob, who you'll see him referred to as Jacob and Israel in this chapter. Jacob's name was changed to Israel by God when he was on his a little bit of an adventure of his own. And Israel is going to be the name that the descendants of Jacob take on. They'll become known as the children of Israel or the nation of Israel. And now to our map section. Geographically speaking, where are we? Well, we're moving from Canaan down to Goshen. Both places are on the map if you have the PDF. Canaan is about 450 miles to the northeast of Egypt. We don't know exactly where in Egypt Joseph was stationed, but we do know that his family was moving to Goshen, which is on the east side of the country of Egypt. Not too far away from the tip of the Red Sea, at least the left fork of the Red Sea. Not too far. My greatest ambition in life is to get scuba diving certified and then go to the Red Sea and look for Egyptian artifacts. Now, why would there be Egyptian artifacts in the Red Sea? That's a good question, and you need to study the book of Exodus to find out. Okay, let's now go to our outline section. This chapter is pretty straightforward. We've got 3 sections today. The middle section is a big old genealogy. That's those names that we read in the middle of the chapter. But let's talk about the 2 bookends. Verses 1 through 7 is our first bookend. Jacob's family moves to Egypt. So Israel, or Jacob, he went to Beersheba. They're on their way down to Egypt, goes to Beersheba, and he offers sacrifices to the Lord. And God spoke to him in a vision and told him not to be afraid to go down to Egypt. So he has God's blessing in going there. God has set this up. God knows what he's doing. He says it's okay to leave the land of Canaan and to go down to Egypt. Now, interestingly, Jacob's father, Isaac, he once received instructions from the Lord not to go down to Egypt during a famine. God said that he was going to take care of him in the land of Canaan. But this time, Jacob is told that it's fine. Go down to Egypt. This plan that God has put together, the saving of Egypt and the surrounding nations by this very wise Egyptian governor, Joseph. This has all been orchestrated by God, and he's putting this whole plan together. Kind of makes you wonder, which world rulers God is directly using today to accomplish some plan of his. I don't know. We don't have the kind of clarity that the scriptures give us in the current day as we have, looking back at a story like Joseph. But no doubt there are people in various countries who have been put there for a reason, and who are, maybe it's all of them, maybe all of them are there accomplishing some piece of God's plan. I think that's likely the case. But, obviously here in Joseph, we see a very special using of him by God, and it makes you wonder. And of course, we know that God still works in these kinds of ways, although the revelation of those things with this kind of clarity is not given to us. It is interesting that as we get into the book of Exodus, here in Genesis, we see God using a really good man to accomplish a really great thing. In the book of Exodus, though, we see a wicked man, Pharaoh of Egypt, an upcoming Pharaoh of Egypt, who God is still using, even though he is a very wicked man, and God is using him for a very different reason than God is using Joseph. So whether you're good or you're bad, God can use you to accomplish his will. I think I would rather have him use me if I was obedient and submissive to him, rather than having to face his judgment and him using me for some purpose like he used Pharaoh, the Exodus Pharaoh. Okay, God promises to bring Jacob's family down to Egypt, but then he says, confirming again the promise to give them the land of Canaan, he says, but one day I'll bring you out of the land. And it's interesting that he says, I'm going to take you down to Egypt, and there you'll become a great nation, and then I'll bring you up, and you'll receive the land of promise. So this is, in a sense, a promise, or a prophetic promise, really. It tells us what God is going to do in the future. And if you know the story of Exodus, and I'm spoiling it, I guess, but you'll know that God, over a period of a couple centuries, grows the descendants of Jacob into a huge group of people in Egypt. And then the Exodus happens, the way out. They leave Egypt, and the journey is to go back to the promised land, the land of Canaan. Who's leading them as they go out of Egypt and go back to Canaan? It's a guy named Moses, who you've probably heard about. Just keep this promise here in chapter 46 in mind, and see how it's fulfilled as you continue reading through the upcoming books of the Bible, especially the book of Exodus. So God's blessing is with Israel as he goes down here. And so Israel takes his sons, his wives, their children, their possessions, everything, down to Egypt on the wagons that Pharaoh had provided for them. Now we get to everyone's favorite part in section number 2, verses 8 through 27, a record of Jacob's family that moved to Egypt. Ah, yes, a genealogy. I know that you've been looking forward to this. It's been a while since we've had a genealogy, and I know that you all miss them dearly. Especially, the worst is like when you're reading a scripture or something in the worship service and the preacher gives you like some section with a genealogy in it. Like, that's a cruel thing to do. Luckily here, I get to edit out all my mistakes and no one sees how bad I am at reading all of these names. But when you have to do it live and in public, that's a rough fate. Okay, verses 8 through 27 is a record of all of the male descendants of Jacob's who moved to Goshen with him. So Goshen is a region of Egypt. Let's see. Do I want to read all these names again? I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're not going to read all of these names again. They're all listed here, the sons and the grandsons of Jacob here on the PDF. So if there's some reason that you need them all listed out by their fathers' households, they're here. For the rest of us, for this audio lesson, I think what we'll do is we'll just remind ourselves of Jacob's 12 sons because their names are really important. They're going to be carried forward in the history of Israel, and they'll be important for us moving forward. So we want to remind ourselves of them, and we want to talk about the way that they're laid out in this small genealogy here in the middle of chapter 46. So let's go ahead and do that. The sons here are listed by their mothers. So Jacob had children with at least 4 women, and the sons of those women are listed in order here. Okay, so first of all, we have Reuben, that's Jacob's oldest, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. Now, do you remember who gave birth to Jacob's oldest sons? It was... No, not Rachel. It was Leah. I almost tricked myself. It was Leah. You remember, Leah was the woman who Jacob never intended to marry. He got tricked by his uncle Laban into marrying Leah. And that story, seems like we covered that so long ago, but it really wasn't that long ago. Jacob married Leah and Rachel. So these first 6 are the sons of Leah. Now, underneath that, we have Gad and Asher. Who was their mother? It was Zilpah. Now, who's Zilpah? Laban gave Leah a servant named Zilpah. And when Leah stopped bearing children, she gave her servant to Jacob, and he had children with her servant, Zilpah. So Gad and Asher, those are children of Zilpah. Next, you're probably going to guess this one, Joseph and Benjamin. We've brought this up several times in our study, who their mother was, because it's important because she was the favorite wife of Jacob. Rachel is their mother, and Rachel is no longer alive at this point. Rachel died giving birth to Benjamin. And then the final 2, Dan and Naphtali. These were the sons of Jacob and Bilhah. Bilhah was the servant that was given to Rachel. And initially, when Rachel couldn't have children, she gave Zilpah, or mixing myself up here. Got to get out of this genealogy. When Rachel couldn't have children, she gave Bilhah to Jacob to have children in her name. And so Bilhah had 2 children, Dan and Naphtali. Whew, okay, that gets us through most of the genealogy. Now you get bonus points if you can tell me who the one daughter of Jacob was that we have named in the text. One of Jacob's daughters is named, I'm not sure if he only had one. It seems like he only had one, but she's named, and there was a whole chapter semi-dedicated to her and something that happened to her. What was her name and who was her mother? I'll tell you her mother. Her mother was Leah, and if you read the chapter, you'll have her name. Her name was Dinah. You remember Dinah was that woman that Shechem was really in love with, and Shechem violated her, and then Levi and Simeon, they go in and they kill the entire town of Hamor and Shechem to take revenge for what they did to their sister, Dinah. So that was chapter 38? No, 30, it was 30 something. That was 34. I just went back and looked it up. So, wow, it does seem like a long time ago. But let's go ahead and finish up this genealogy section by reading verse 27 again, which I have quoted on the PDF. All the persons belonging to Jacob who came into Egypt, who were his descendants, not including Jacob's sons' wives, were 66 persons in all. Okay, so now we move to the other side of the bookend. This is section number 3, which will finish us up for today. And keep in mind as we conclude this chapter that it flows right into chapter 47. So there is a chapter break here, but really it just flows directly. It's one continuous story. So our last section is entitled Joseph is Reunited with His Father, 28 through 34. When Joseph received the news that his father was in Goshen, he prepared his chariot and he went to meet him. And there's this great scene, there's this really happy reunion after being separated for a couple decades, and says that they wept together for a period of time. Afterwards, Joseph then represented his brothers before Pharaoh, and he told Pharaoh that they were shepherds by occupation. Joseph's advocacy for them was important because the Egyptians didn't traditionally like shepherds. And it seems like Joseph may have played on this a little bit to allow them to live in the land of Goshen, which seems like it was the perfect area for them to live and for them to thrive in. So the Egyptians were mainly agricultural, they were kind of farmers, and they weren't really too fond of shepherds. And so Joseph says, hey, let my people, let my family live over here in Goshen. Seems like that would be kind of maybe out of the way of the Egyptians who didn't like them or didn't like that profession as much as some others. I was reading somewhere that the Egyptians had kind of a caste system or like a class system, and shepherds were very far down on that class system, so lower class people. So Joseph says, when Pharaoh asks you what your job is, don't lie to him or anything like that. Just tell him that you're shepherds. And it seems like Joseph thinks like, I can use that to our advantage to settle you in the land of Goshen, and that's going to be a fantastic place for my family to live and thrive. So we'll see that picked up on in the beginning of chapter 47. I did want to make mention here of some kind of foreshadowing that we see here, similarities between Joseph and what he does for his brothers and Jesus and what he does for us. So Joseph here, he's bringing his family down here, and without Joseph, the family of Jacob probably would have been looked down on. They certainly wouldn't have been in a place of honor or in a position to receive a blessing, especially considering their profession is one that's despised by the Egyptians. And yet, Joseph is their advocate. And so he goes to the king and he says, hey, this is my family. And because of that, Pharaoh treats them very well, and they receive this great homeland. In a similar way, us as sinners, we're not in a position to make requests or to receive positions of honor or blessing. But since Jesus comes and advocates for us, we receive a blessing and we receive a homeland of our own in heaven that we don't necessarily deserve, and we certainly wouldn't get otherwise if it weren't for the advocacy of our brother Jesus. It might seem strange to some to refer to Jesus as a brother or as our brother, but this is actually the language of the scriptures. If you read Hebrews chapter 2, verse 11, Romans chapter 8, verse 29, there Jesus is talked about in a brotherly relationship with us, with those who become his disciples. So there's an application there for us in the actions of Joseph and some foreshadowing that we see. But let's also talk about another application, and I'm actually going to steal one from my Exodus study and bring it over here just to make this a little bit more practical or make it a little bit more understandable. The application for today, the characters that are mentioned in this chapter are very important to keep in your memory. Israel's descendants were about to multiply exponentially over the next couple of centuries. Israel's 12 sons would become the heads of the tribes of Israel. The nation of Israel is the centerpiece of the rest of this old covenant of God. Almost all the work of God that we read about in the Bible centers around the descendants of Jacob's 12 sons. Not all of what God is going to do centers around these 12 tribes, but much of it does. Remember how God promised to make Abraham and Isaac's family into a great nation? Well, this is the beginning of the fulfillment of that promise, and this is the nation that we're going to be following for quite some time. We kind of already see, if you look at all the names of the sons and the grandsons of Israel in this chapter, there's already a big old group. There's like 70 people going on. And we were just at Isaac. You remember Isaac? He was an only child of Abraham and Sarah. So there was all this question about how's God going to turn these people into a great nation? It's like Abraham didn't have a son until he was really old, and he only has one son there with Sarah at least. And here God's promising, I'm going to make you into a great nation. And we're like, oh, okay, well, seems like we need to hurry up a little bit. And then we have Isaac, who, initially his wife Rebecca is having trouble having children at all. And then we have Jacob, and Jacob has a lot of children. He has his 12 sons, and then they all start multiplying and having more and more children until there's this group of like 70 people going down to Egypt. Now, I don't know if you've ever used one of those like compound multiplication calculators to see how quickly a group can grow from being very, very small to a really, really large nation if they keep multiplying over a period of years. But what we're going to see here is kind of that same effect, a compounding of the multiplier. As these 70 start having children of their own, this thing starts growing very, very quickly. And that's the application part that I actually stole from my Exodus study. When we open the book of Exodus, we are going to have skipped several decades of time. And the nation of Israel is not just going to be 12 brothers anymore. It's going to be a proper nation of people. The question is, how fast can 12 brothers grow into an exceedingly strong nation, as they're called at the beginning of Exodus? Let's do some basic math. And I think this is a very conservative calculation that I've used here. Let's assume that each brother had 5 children, and each of their children had 5 children. We're told in the text that God was really blessing this nation and really causing them to be very fruitful and to multiply. And so 5 children might very well be a very conservative estimate. And here goes our compounding multiplying calculator. Let's say you start off in one generation, the first generation, with 60 people. Okay, you got 60 people. How long is it going to take this nation to grow to, say, 1 million people? You would think that would be a really long time. 60 to 1 million? I mean, that's a lot. But let's actually find out. If you multiply 60 by 5, each is having 5 children. That's 300 people the next generation. Now you do that again in generation 3, 300 times 5 children, 1,500 people. Okay, we're still nowhere near 1 million. Generation 4, if all of them have 5 children, that's 7,500 people. Generation 5, if all of them have 5 children, that's 37,500 people. Okay, so our numbers are climbing a little bit here. If all of those people have 5 children in the next generation, that's 187,000. And then in generation 7, if all 187,000 of those produce 5 children, that's 937,500,000. So just under 1 million people. And how long? 7 generations. Now I realize that's not perfect math. It doesn't account for, all the people who potentially could have died, or people who could have had more children than 5, less children than 5. Doesn't account necessarily for all the differences between the men and the women in that group and who they marry. But you kind of get the idea. If you're producing a significant amount of children in each generation, which the Bible tells us they were, and we even see that in the sons of Jacob in this chapter. But that continued, even probably to a greater degree, the Bible tells us in the next couple generations. Then it only takes you about 7 generations to get up to 1 million people. So all of a sudden, we go from Isaac, the only child who is born in the old age of Abraham, 10 generations or so after that, you're at 1 million people. And if we give 30 years between these generations, which I think is highly conservative, then the 12 brothers could have produced nearly 1 million children in roughly 200 years. 200 years. That's not that much time, especially because we know that like Abraham, Isaac, both of them lived to be 175, 180 years old. People are living a long time. This is within like 2 lifetimes, essentially. So why do we go through all this math? Well, sometimes you'll hear people question that. They say, Israel never could have become this great nation that's talked about in the book of Exodus, this great nation that the Bible describes. This is historically inaccurate. It doesn't make sense. The numbers don't add up. And you can't go from 12 people to 1 million people in a period of 200 years, couple decades or whatever. But actually, if you do the math and you consider the language of the Bible that these people were being very fruitful and that God was blessing them to be more and more fruitful, have more and more children, then you see that the math actually checks out quite easily here. So just as God promises to Jacob in chapter 46, he's going to bring his family down to Egypt, and there they are going to become a great nation, fulfilling the promise that he originally gave to Abraham all those years ago. And in this application, hopefully, we have been able to show through this rudimentary math here that what God promised to do, he brings about in a mighty way. This isn't going to be just a nation of a couple thousand people. This is going to be a huge group of people. And as God told Abraham, I'm going to make your descendants like the stars in the sky, the sand on the sea. You see 1 million people around. That is what that looks like. God hasn't forgotten his promise. He's bringing it about as we're walking through this story. This reinforces the centrality of that promise to the story of Genesis and even moving forward in the scriptures after Genesis. So God's going to keep his promise, and this application hopefully gives you some clarity about how he does that and how that's possible to do in such a short period of time. So I think that's going to do it today for our study in Genesis chapter 46. We are slowly ticking down the chapters of Genesis, making our way to chapter 50, which will be our final chapter. We've got to conclude the story of Joseph here, and that's what we're going to be doing in the next couple chapters. All right, well, I hope you have a blessed day, and remember to print off the PDF if you haven't already, or go online to Amazon and buy the book if you would like to do that. Lord willing, we'll be back in our next study to continue where this chapter left off and talk about chapter 47.